the STIP series that we have started in the Habitat Center exactly 2 years ago. Perhaps Professor Sachin Chaturvedi will tell you a little more about the series, because we have had, over these 2 years, since September 2017, a host of wonderfully distinguished speakers and varied topics. And so I think it's with a sense of celebration that we start off this particular lecture. It's really a real pleasure for me to welcome our speaker for this evening, Dr. Shekhar C. Mande, Secretary of the DSIR and DG of the CSIR, and also the chairperson of this session, Dr. Chandrima Shaha, a professor of eminence and former director of the National Institute of Immunology, New Delhi, who was a close neighbor of ours. We had a campus right next to, when I was DG of Indian Institute of Mass Communication, the National Institute of Immunology, if you know your geography in that side of Delhi, is right next door. So we had a few brief interactions at that time when we were heading. Elect the first woman in 84 years of the Indian National Science Academy. It's a wonderful occasion to have you all here. The STIP is a unique forum.
Room available to us, and for the nice tea and coffee that we have been enjoying for 2 years. So this is extremely kind of you, and good that India Habitat Center is also promoting the lectures that we are publishing, and your library is providing that to various stakeholders who are interested in carrying forward science, technology, policy debates in the country. And I'm very glad that with some of our flagship economic programs, quite a few of these lectures, as you very rightly mentioned, the series is on for 2 years, and today is the 23rd lecture. And every month we had this series. I don't want to read out names, but it was initiated with the lecture on sustainable development goals by the very idea of climate change, technology strategies, artificial intelligence, you name it. And in 2 years, those of you who are following him on Twitter know very well of the huge commitments that he has been undertaking all this while. We are equally delighted to have a chair, as Mr. Tandon very rightly pointed out, Professor Chandrima Shaha. I think this is absolutely fascinating to see a professor of eminence at National Institute of Immunology, who has great interest in cricket, which I did not know at all, and I just picked it up. But those of you who are following media would very well place her. She was in newspapers all across as first woman to head the prestigious Indian National Science Academy. She's member of all the 3 academies that we have in this country, and she has served as Vice President of International Affairs of the Indian National Science Academy, and also as a member of the council of all 3 academies. She has been with several fellowships and connected with several institutions in the country, be that through the J.C. Bose Fellowship or Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar Award that was recognized for her research work. And currently she is also a member of the governing council of ICMR and IIT Gandhinagar, Executive Council of the University of Hyderabad. She has been contributing in several capacities through the task forces that Department of Biotechnology and others have established. She did her MSc and PhD from University of Calcutta. So that...
pleasure to be here, and all the more reason because Dr. Mande is speaking today. I've known him for many years now and always appreciated his insightful thoughts on various issues, and who's now Secretary DSIR and DG CSIR. So also my relation to Dr. Tandon and Dr. Rupal, who is here, and Dr. Chaturvedi, and friends, all of you. Dr. Mande today is going to cover a very relevant domain in his lecture today, and I would like to offer a few comments here. We scientists as a community tend to overlook the importance of public engagement with the scientific enterprise. Now, this may be because we scientists are very, very much inside ourselves and pretty satisfied with our own laboratory work and do not go about too much connecting to people. But communication with the public is particularly important in today's context. All the more reason because there is so much information and so much misinformation, and that distracts people. And that is why the scientists need to go out and communicate with the society. You search Google and you get 1,000 hits, 1,000,000 hits. So somewhere somebody has to guide to show what are the challenges, what are the real challenges that we face. And for this reason, it is, I think, very strongly what today STIP is doing is very important, because the general public needs to know what are the relevant issues that affect society and how science and technology is going to address that. So, and in today's world, the problems actually transcend borders. For example, the diseases that are occurring in a certain part of the world, there is a conflict which is happening, and people are migrating from one place to another, perhaps another nation, another nation, or another place. And with them, the disease migrates. And so we get new repeatedly. And therefore, adequate information and discussion in proper forums are essential. Now, in the context of such changes, it is the
for me to be here, and I'm glad that Professor Chaturvedi did not tell me before coming here who were the people who gave talk before me. I would have felt anxious much earlier than now. Also, till the time I walked into this hall, I was not aware that it is called Science, Technology, Innovation Policy, and it almost appears as if I have plagiarized the title, so, which was unintentional. I can assure you about that. What I would like to do is touch upon the aspects of science and technology and innovation, and try to connect that with the society, how it actually helps society to grow, and how it has helped societies around the world to grow, and rather limit myself to the local context that around us in the geographical region that we are, how it has helped in different ways to help our society grow. But before that, let me first of all thank the India Habitat Center and this forum to invite me here. I feel very privileged, and thanks Purnima for inviting me for this particular one.
Thank you, sir, for accepting.
I'm going to actually deal with each of the three with different kinds of examples, science, technology and innovation, and towards the end I will try to connect it with the society, but the connection will be very apparent as I talk about. So I start with the basic science first, and I'm going to quote from a book which is a very famous cult book for the scientists, and the book is written by a person called Abraham Flexner. So for the people who are not from the science background here, Abraham Flexner was the director of Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, and while he was the president of Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, his three most famous recruits were Gödel. Many of you would have heard about Gödel. John von Neumann. Some of you would have known about Neumann, is absolute cult in electronics and mathematics. And the third, I don't have to say who it was Albert Einstein. So these were the three people that he recruited there. And more than that, he also generated a document for the medical policy of the US in the early 1900s. So he was a very famous person, Abraham Flexner, a very influential person in science policy in US then. And a book that he wrote, or rather an essay that he wrote, is titled The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge. It's a very apt title. And I'm going to read from the quotation, and then you will see how profound is the quotation. The quotation says, "Is it not a curious fact that in a world steeped in irrational hatreds, which threaten civilization itself, men and women, old and young, detach themselves wholly or partly from the angry current of the daily life to devote themselves to the cultivation of beauty, to the extension of knowledge, to the cure of disease, to the amelioration of suffering, just as though fanatics were not simultaneously engaged in spreading pain, ugliness and suffering." is a fantastic quotation. It's the starting quotation of this particular essay that he has written. Many of us here who are on the wrong side of the 50 have lived through the world which has seen absolutely atrocious and bizarre things around the world. Kind of Holocaust and all. Those of you know the history of Cambodia, for example. What Pol Pot did in Cambodia in our lifetimes. And just to think of it, Pol Pot was educated in one of the most advanced and one of the most accepting societies, that was in France in the 1950s. And he was the part of French society when all the painters were painting and creating art, and the new thinkers, Sartre and all, were writing essays and things like that. Pol Pot was there at that particular time. And when he went back to Cambodia, he did exactly opposite. And that was in our own lifetime. So while we are enjoying the fruits of peace, peaceful and coexistence with so many different people in our country, just a few thousand kilometers away, there was a massacre which was taking place. It was absolutely irrational. Nonetheless, there is a group of people who completely ignore themselves and detach themselves from what is happening around them, and they are perfectly happy to work in their laboratories and keep creating knowledge. And that's knowledge is what all of us strive for, the advancing frontiers of knowledge all the time. And that's what the scientific community is of. And the scientific community is not the only community which does that. Around the world, even the artists, the poets, the dramatists, all of them do the same thing. They detach themselves from happenings around the world and do that. And science and technology actually connects very well with all these endeavors of creation of beauty, creation of knowledge, and so on and so forth. And the two examples that I would like to give you how science and technology are backed up in creation of art. For example, human creativity is very well expressed in many different forms of arts, and it has been from time immemorial. The photograph that I show you here is from the Bhimbetka caves near Bhopal. These are rock paintings made roughly about 30 to 50,000 years ago. So humans had not even formed societies then. So humans were still foragers and hunter-gatherers, and still they would like to express themselves in some form of an art. And that's exactly what they did. But the art also was backed up by some sort of a technology. The paints that they made, of course, was from some kind of a knowledge, and these paints have sustained themselves for 30,000 years. There's something amazing. And the paints were made from grinding stones, from vegetable extracts, and so on and so forth. So they have withstood tens of thousands of years out of this. The second example that I want to give you is the iconic figure of what we call as the dancing girl from the Harappan excavations. And when this was excavated, the people actually started wondering what it is about and how beautiful this particular young lady is about. I've taken this from Wikipedia, so it's certainly plagiarized. This statue told us two different things, two very interesting things. First of all, even 2,500 BC, the civilization then knew metal blending. It's a copper zinc alloy which is actually made of, and people knew how to cast these alloys and make figures of this kind. Secondly, entertainment was an integral part of culture. If this is supposed to be a dancing girl, the kind of posture that she has, most archaeologists believe that it's actually a dancing girl, and very well decorated. She has bangles all the way up to her shoulders and so on and so forth. And it is believed that this is a dancing girl, and therefore it is believed that entertainment was a integral part of the society. And it has always been. As I said, even in the rock paintings, and then entertainment or the manifestation of human creativity will always remain a part of human civilization. And science and technology backs it up extremely well. Let us move on to science. So those of you, this is a very common slide which is shown in many different lectures. And those of you who have not seen it earlier, it is called the Bohr-Pasteur-Edison conundrum. Basically, if you see here on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, that when the scientists are working madly in their labs, there is very little consideration that what the discoveries would eventually translate to for the benefit of the society. On the y-axis, that is the vertical axis, there are also, basically what I said just now is for the fundamental understanding is on the y-axis, the vertical axis, and the consideration of use is on the horizontal axis. And it's typically typified by these three examples. People like Niels Bohr were completely involved in curiosity-driven research, exploration of nature, and just trying to gain fundamental understanding of nature. C.V. Raman belonged to that particular category, and I'm going to give a few examples of C.V. Raman in a few slides from now. On the other hand, if you look at the right bottom corner, is Thomas Alva Edison. Is one of the greatest innovators of all time, had patented something like 1,000+ patents in US, and had the ability to understand science and technology that has happened till now, and then how people would benefit by this particular knowledge, and then he patented many things, and he of course made many new things. He's also the person who started the General Electric, which has survived till now. And then in between you have people who have done both, people like Louis Pasteur, who not only did inspired basic research, but also thought of applications thereof. And the example of Edison is also people like Jesse Bose, who also were involved in basic research, but also demonstrated remote bell and gunpowder explosion and all. So let us look at a few examples of science. I'm going to, in each of the examples that I give you, science, technology, innovation, there will be a component which is taken from few tens of years ago, 100 years ago, or maybe even 1,000 years ago, and some of the contemporary examples. And these are very subjective examples that I picked up. So the first example about the science that I want to give is that of C.V. Raman's work. Raman was simply fired by curiosity, the curiosity of the nature. When he traveled to UK, the curious thought that why ocean is blue. There is a simple thought. There is no application whatsoever or how society will benefit by understanding why ocean is blue. And he dismissed the theory that ocean is a reflection of the sky. He did a polarization experiment on the ship, and instantly he dismissed the theory. He was curious by the fact, why do Indian instruments sound better than some of the Western instruments? Okay, is it really true, or is simply an emotional sentiment? And then he went on to show that Indian instruments such as Veena or Sitar, they produce many more harmonics than some of the Western instruments. He went on to also show the same in the drums. The mridangam and tabla actually produce more harmonics than the drums that you actually get from the Western instruments. Not only that, the asymmetry of that shahi on tabla is actually to produce those kind of harmonics. Some of the harmonics are missing. And that's how C.V. Raman's work. And these are the two publications that he has here on this particular effect. But also he was very fired by the effect by certain unknown radiation, that if you take liquids and if light is incident on these liquids, what you see are the bands on either side of the incident radiation, and what eventually came to be known as the Raman effect. And there's a fantastic story about all of this. That's for some other time, we'll reserve that. But on 28th February 1928, he observed that there are bands on either side of the incident radiation, what now we know as the Raman spectrum or Raman scattering, and that became one of the most powerful explanations of the quantum theory. The paper was rejected by a very iconic journal, what we call as Nature. All the scientists in the audience would know, but editor accepted the paper. Editor immediately understood that the paper is of very fundamental work, and therefore he said that Professor Raman's brilliant and surprising discovery, and therefore it needs to be accepted, and rest is history. I want to come to a more contemporary example. What is happening in science in the country right now? And these are very exciting times that we are living through, even in India. Whole lot of our colleagues are doing very exciting stuff. And I have chosen an example from a very close friend of mine from Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology in Hyderabad. Here, my colleague and close long-time friend, Rajan Shankanarayanan, has been involved in very fundamental question, that in biology, the molecules are asymmetric. Most of the molecules that make up life. So our body has different kinds of molecules like DNA, the proteins and all, and our body is full of them. All living forms are full of these molecules. But the beauty of this fact is that in each of these molecules, there is chirality. So there are two kinds of molecules, the ones which are L and one which are D, and they are mirror images of each other. But somehow nature tends to select only one chirality. It's a deep philosophical question. Why has nature chosen of only one chirality? Was it an accident or was it something else? If it is an accident, why has nature perpetrated that over millions of years? Ever since the new life forms started forming a few billion years ago, why has nature persisted with the same chirality? And this question is being addressed by Rajan Shankanarayanan, and he has done fantastic work in CCMB Hyderabad, the work that we are very excited with, and hopefully it will become part of the common textbooks in the coming years, what he has been doing. How nature distinguishes between the two chiral forms and chooses only one of them, and does not even by mistake incorporates the other chiral form. A mistake can be catastrophic to life forms, and therefore nature persists only with one chirality. And it's a beautiful piece of work, and we can go on talking about it for hours about the work that he has been doing there. I want to quickly move to technology because I know I don't have much time. And technology, of course, is the fact where we have made certain discoveries in the lab. How these discoveries can be applied to for some kind of a use for humanity. And one of the most iconic technologies of the country, of course, or the engineers of the country, is Sir Vishwesharaya. And if you remember, we celebrate his birthday every year as the National Engineers Day every year, and only about a few days ago we celebrated his birthday. The photograph that I'm showing you here is not a very deep science, but a technology which is of great use. This is the photograph of Usman Sagar Lake that I have taken myself in Hyderabad. Now, till about 1900, Hyderabad was ravaged with floods by river Musi. Okay, so there are two problems. They were perpetually short of drinking water. The second problem, that all the time in the rainy seasons, the Musi would have floods and many people would die and cause a lot of damage. Nizam then consulted, the last Nizam of Hyderabad consulted Sir Vishwesharaya and asked him for the solution. And Sir Vishwesharaya suggested that we make a dam, what is now called as the Usman Sagar Dam, and an adjoining one is called the Himayat Sagar. And that solved both the problems in one go. It stopped the problems of the floods and provided drinking water to the entire Hyderabad city. And that's technology, that's engineering, that's a marvel. Coming to the recent example of technology, this is a technology that was developed in a CSR lab in Dehradun. We have a lab called Indian Institute of Petroleum in Dehradun. Now the problem is that we have been importing paraffin wax to a great deal in the country. So CSR Indians of Petroleum, they decided that they will come up with a technology. In the end, they also patented the technology, so they have a US patent on this, and showed that wax can be generated from oil discards. So if you go to an oil field, oil refinery, whatever is discarded from there, we can actually generate wax from there. And lo and behold, this plant is now installed, has been commissioned in Numaligarh in Assam, and as a result, the country now saves something like 500 crores per year import of the wax. And we now take care of roughly 50% of production of wax in the country. And this wax can go for multiple uses. What you can see is that. So both the examples of great technologies that what we have is from here. So not a deep science here. Of course, it was backed up by science several decades ago, how to generate this. But nonetheless, the need of the hour was to develop a technology that can generate wax, and we can use it here. Now we come to more interesting aspect, and that of innovation. Now innovation is much more exciting and much exciting to talk about, very interesting to talk about. Science and technology, of course, is very exciting, but what actually comes as an innovation? There's many things that many times we think are very trivial, and with a bright spark in the mind, you can do something which is amazing. And let me give you a couple of examples of this. Something literally amazing that anybody could have thought of, but just put in action, and what we call as eventually innovation, how it happens. Now, for several ages, for thousands of years, human beings have been making flour. Many of you have seen wheat flour and all those things, corn flour and all. We have been making that. There is evidence, archaeological evidence, that even 6,000 years ago, there were flour wheels which were available. So what you used to make at home, and some of us would have seen our grandmothers and mothers, they used to have these wheels and they would grind in that. They would put grains in the middle and they would keep grinding. Now that of course is well known around the world. But people living in the hill areas, Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, UP, Northeast, they realized that when water falls, that energy can be used for generating some sort of momentum on a wheel. And you know what? Lo and behold, you have these examples of what we call as the gharats. I hope many of you would have seen this. They have existed in the Himalayan states since 7th century. It's amazing that people more than 1,000 years ago actually thought that water which is falling can generate energy, and that energy can be utilized to spin this wheel, is absolutely fantastic. And that's an innovation. Somebody thought that the falling water can be used to spin this wheel, and therefore we can actually generate flour out of this particular one. So the grains come from in the center, the top wheel is rotating and the stationary wheel is at the bottom, and the rotation, the momentum comes because of the water which falls, and there is an intricate gear system which is connected to that. Absolutely fascinating. How people thought of it in 7th century AD, that people could use water energy to harness this. And many of these still exist. Unfortunately, with the advent of electricity and all, now many of them are going out of fashion. But if you go and trek in the Himalayas, which we did about 10 days ago, you actually see that remote villages is still under use. And we do hope that they will exist for many more years to come. I want to tell you a very fascinating recent story of innovation. In the last few years it happens. All of you are aware of Uber, right? Yeah, almost everyone in the audience has taken an Uber. There is a story of a person called Travis Kalanick. He's a person who was a student in UCLA, University of California at Los Angeles. He eventually dropped out of the computer science course of UCLA because he wanted to do something more exciting. He wanted to have an entrepreneurship. So he started a company which went bankrupt in no time. So still he did not give up. So imagine for a person who was pursuing a course in software, in IT, in University of California at Los Angeles, dropping out to make entrepreneurship as his dream. Then he founded another company called Red Swoosh, and the Red Swoosh was bought up by someone else very soon, and he became millionaire. When he became millionaire, he decided that he's going to go around the world and attend conferences, meetings, and just enjoy himself. And during that time, he realized that getting cabs is not a very easy thing. You have to wait for the cabs, you have to go to a cab stand. If you flag a cab, that's not a very easy thing to do, and so on and so forth. And especially, he even in New York, while riding a cab, with an argument with the cab driver who was charging more money, he actually jumped out of the cab himself. That's the story that he jumped out. But when he was attending a conference, a web conference in Paris, and he was waiting for a cab, he recognized the fact that we live in the IT age or the IoT age, and at that time, how we can use IT as a power to generate entrepreneurship. And he thought that he would have an app on which you can call a cab at the will of yours, wherever you are in the world. It became an instant hit, especially in Los Angeles, and in the Bay Area, it is an absolute hit. It transferred to all of the cities in no time in US, and today Uber is available in more than 700 cities in the world. The market capitalization of Uber is more than $100 billion on today's date, roughly about 10 years since it was founded. The market capitalization of Uber is more than General Motors, Chrysler, and Ford put together. It's unimaginable. A single brilliant piece of thought in a mind could convert it into a company which is more than $100 billion company. And that is innovation. All that was known, science was known behind it, the technology was known behind it. He did not have to develop any new technology. All he had to do was simply convert into an app and put into use so that everyone around the world benefits by it. And all of us benefit by it here in this room. So this is fantastic. It's a great state. Now, having discussed these examples, we should also introspect on what role does the state play in promoting science, in promoting technology, and in promoting innovation. State has to play a role, and all of us actually belong to some sort of those decision making and state. So your state must play a role in enabling all the three aspects so that the society eventually benefits. Right? At the end goal is the society has to benefit. And the role of the state is very well documented. State enables an environment in which everyone would get a free will of thought so that we can actually work on whatever you want. So you don't drag people down. That typically we do what we see, and we have to actually somehow avoid those tendencies of dragging people down. But rather people who are brilliant, people who are motivated, people who are doing something which seems to be good, we have to promote them. And state actually must not come in their way. Number two, state also provides infrastructure. And I'm going to give you two examples of how state provides infrastructure. One very old example. This is an example once again from 2500 BC. This is an example from the excavations at Lothal. About 2500 BC, roughly about the Harappan and Mohenjo-daro period. And this is the first known example of a port in the world, seaport. As all of you know, India was intermediate on the Silk Route. The Silk Route used to start from China and go all the way up to Central Europe, Central Asia and Europe. And there was also a spice route that used to start from Southeast Asia and once again used to go to Arabia and thereby to Europe and so on and so forth. And the two were connected. The Silk Route and the spice route were connected through several connections that went through Pakistan and Rajasthan and so on and so forth. But the spice route, one of the major components was the shipping or the trade that happened. And this is one of the first examples. And you can imagine that the rulers of Lothal then actually thought of creating something like this so that the trade would be promoted, and that's exactly what state has to do. State has to create infrastructure so that people can use that in the use of this infrastructure for promoting innovation in the end. I want to skip this example. This is a Kalanick Dam on Kaveri near Trichy, so on and so forth. I want to come to some of the recent examples and then I will close in about 5 minutes. I want to come up with the recent examples at how science, technology, and innovation has led modern India. There is a very deep thought that how modern India has evolved, especially the post-colonial period. Now, it is important to reflect back the pre-colonial period and post-colonial period and what happened about 200 years in between. When the British arrived here, our contribution to world GDP was of the order of about 27%. And there's a beautiful book by Shashi Tharoor, which he has actually articulates very well in that, what the British did that. When the British left, our contribution to world GDP had dropped down to less than 2%, right? So essentially what British did is something like it's estimated about, I may be wrong on the number, but about $5 or $50 trillion is what British took away from the country. And that dropped our contribution of world GDP to 2%. We had nothing of our own. We are not able to generate our own food. We could not make our own clothes, and we had no industry whatsoever. That's the state that you are left in. How do you resurrect an independent state out of all this? And the only recipe for generating an independent state which aspires to be world leader in some sort of, in terms of economy, in terms of affluence, in terms of its people who live in happiness, the only way of doing that is adopt science and technology as the driver of that. It cannot be denied that science and technology is the central thing which will drive entire thing, all the economics, all the prosperity, all the affluence of the society around it. And what India did was precisely that. There are about 70 different countries which became independent about the same time. They came out of the post-colonial era, what you call as the post-colonial era, about 70 different countries. There's one country which adopted science as the driver of its affluence, and that's we. And the results are very well known. So what we had done was in around 1940 or so, this gentleman shown here is Diwan Bahadur Arcot Ramaswamy Mudliya. They're fantastic twin brothers, he and Lakshman Swamy Mudliya. Both of them contributed enormously. He was the member of the Viceroy's Executive Council and the Commerce Council, and he persuaded the British to start what is called as the Board of Scientific and Industrial Research in 1940. It was the war period. The discussion had become pre-war. The Nature is once again the iconic journal that all of us know. His editorial written in 1933 was very conveniently shelved by the British then. But during the war period, British thought that maybe India should have its own scientific research organization. And there it started as the Industrial Research Utilization Committee, an Industrial Research Fund, and also the Board of Scientific and Industrial Research. It started in Calcutta. And then Arcot Ramaswamy Mudliya convinced Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, Sir Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, to come and join in Calcutta this particular organization. And there started the first organization in the country which would receive support from the government and which was supposed to extend its support to the society to promote science, technology, and innovation. And that organization, what we call today, is the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research, which I very proudly right now belong to. So the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, or the CSIR, started in 1942, 26 September. We have our foundation day coming up next week. soon after the independence, we also started the Indian Council of Agricultural Research, Indian Council of Medical Research. The Department of Atomic Energy started in the discussions that took place in the National Physical Laboratory. The other day we were in National Physical Laboratory's auditorium, and that's the place where all the discussions to start DAE and TFR, they had started. And Bhabha was pleading very emotionally to start this kind of thing, and there were different views that were expressed, but nonetheless we started. DRDO, Department of Science and Technology, all of this, Department of Space, all of these started post-independence. But we should be grateful that all the government that have been in place till now, all of them have been very supportive for science and technology and in turn innovation. And of course, we should be very proud of the fact that by simple fact that CSR came into existence and we started driving science and technology in the country, the Constitution of India also decided that they are going to ingrain science and technology in the Constitution of India. And of course, all of you know this. The Article 51A, Section G and H, they actually tell us that we have to inculcate scientific temper in our own routine things. So we have a very proud constitution. It's one of the unique constitutions around the world which says that scientific temper has to be built in our day-to-day lives. Post-independence, we have gone through different eras, different time periods. 1950s to 70s was a time period of self-reliance. We had to generate our own food. Some of you may recall 1943 famine in West Bengal. It killed roughly about 30 lakh people. So we had to become independent of food. Those of you who remember PL 486 project, we used to import wheat from Australia and all, and we had to actually make sure that we don't do that anymore. That was a period of self-reliance. Then forcing people to come up with proper environmentally friendly way of processing leather. Today, since 1996, today in 1996, the leather industry has come to a stage and is unbelievable. If I tell you the numbers, it's absolutely unbelievable. At one point of time, the leather business in the country was about to shut down. Today, our leather exports are $5.8 billion. The leather industry in India employs about 40 lakh people. Imagine the kind of social value it has brought to the country. The entire leather industry was resurrected, and was resurrected by the single institute. Very often we have been criticized that why CSR should support so many different labs. And the other day, a very high-powered committee constituted by none other than Prime Minister of India, that committee asked me to justify why Leather Institute should exist. And I said, $5.8 billion export, 40 lakh people employed. And even today, if something comes up, for example, the talk of the town is that we use chrome for tanning, and we want to have technology to reduce chrome. CRR has done that already, and that is already being implemented in the field. And not only here, we are also trying to implement this thing in many of the African nations. The enormous social benefit that actually these kind of institutes bring about. And there is no one else but CLRI in the country which works very specifically in this focused area. I want to give you one small example of scientific social responsibility, and this is about seaweed cultivation. Now I'm going to show you a video, which is a 15 seconds video. These are the women who are the wives of fishermen across the coastal region in Tamil Nadu and of course many different states. We decided that we will do seaweed cultivation there. Our lab of Bhavnagar, the Central Salt and Marine Chemical Research Institute, decided that they are going to teach these women how to cultivate seaweeds. What is the value? Seaweeds can be used as a product, as the starting material for something called carrageenan. Carrageenan is a common material that is used in ice creams, jelly, and so on and so forth. Most of the people around the world use animal fat. But in our country, many people would not eat that because it is derived from animals. But seaweeds also is also a very good source of that. Apart from that, it also can use, seaweeds can be used as biostimulants in agriculture. When we started this program, we decided that we are going to help about 2,000 women, which were self-help groups. These women were fisherwomen essentially, and had no means of self-sustaining except helping their husband in fishing. Now, these women are generating, about 2,000 women are generating about 10 to 20,000 rupees on their own by cultivating seaweeds. A startup came forward called AquaAgri. They came forward and said that we'll commercialize this, and AquaAgri has been supported by IFCO, and that's absolutely amazing. And this is, those of you who probably understand Tamil, I think the volume is not on. Just to show how they're actually putting the seaweed on these floaters, and these floaters now would be taken in the sea, about 50 or 100 meters from the coast, and the seaweeds would grow there, and then we would actually harvest these things. Okay. So these are all actual women from the field who have done this particular work. So this is once again a good example of scientific social responsibility. And the last example of scientific social responsibility, and I will end, is that about this particular device, what we call as the VNAN. In India today, we have about 8 lakhs or 80 lakhs, I may be wrong on the number, people who are visually challenged. So we have a large social burden of people who are visually challenged. Bulk of these are 50 plus, but many of the visually challenged people are also born visually challenged. Now these people, of course, we can teach them to read in Braille, but you can imagine a 50 plus person, if you try to teach that person Braille, it's all going to be difficult. Now this is a great example of innovation. The technology behind this is not very deep. The science behind it is not very deep, but it's a device which is a simple text-to-speech converter. You can imagine text-to-speech converters exist all over the world, right? But this device, you take a piece of paper and scan it on that paper. Once you scan it on the paper with a newspaper or a book or something, it reads out to you what is written on that piece of paper. Now imagine how much social benefit it brings. How much relief does it bring to people who are visually challenged? It also brings relief to people who are not educated, those who cannot read or write. So not much science, not much technology behind it that has been very well developed, but the innovation. The innovation behind the generation of this kind of device is absolutely fascinating. And our lab in CSIO Chandigarh that has generated this device, and we are hoping that we will populate our society with this particular device, which is called the VNAN. Now what I want to do, I want to end with this particular slide, is now having seen that we have made great progress since independence, we yet have large number of challenges ahead of us. When some of our greatest challenges are creation of jobs, self-dependence in strategic areas, boosting industrial productions, and newspapers every day, day in, day out, they're full of these kind of things. What are the challenges that our society faces? Very specifically, we face challenges on smart cities. How do we generate smart cities so that we have environmentally friendly transport and so on and so forth? To provide potable water, we actually are a water-stressed country right now. On today's date, we have converted ourselves into a water-stressed countries, and we are leading to a crisis. In about 20 years from now, we have a definite water crisis in the country. And unless we have solutions which are implemented, we are actually going to find a very difficult period ahead of us. So we have to have technology, we have to have innovation, which will get out of this. You already know healthcare, nutrition, wellness, and so on and so forth are some of the priorities that the government has put forward to us. Sustainable energy and environmental protection and so on and so forth. There's a mention of SDGs mentioned a little bit earlier, and we are committed by many different agreements, especially the Paris Agreement more recently, that we are committed to SDGs and so on and so forth. There are many areas, and thankfully we have a very strong backing of science and technology and innovation. There are a great number of young people that we see who give us hope that we are on the right path. There's a good support from the government, there's a good support from the public, and what we need to do simply is to maintain this particular momentum so that we become a very affluent nation in the coming years from now. Thank you very much for your attention.
Can be termed as an innovation, but now again it has become a debatable innovation. Whether the need to ask is that shouldn't there be a body at the state level which can filter the innovations as and when they are made in order to see the long-term impacts of
the controlling body on what is good for society and what is not good for society. Natural selection takes place automatically. Something which is not good for society, industry emerged, millions of horses were culled because they were not needed. Very little we realized at that time that we are going to depend on fossil fuels for the entire automobile industry. How the negative effects can be gotten over. So we have to find out a way of anything that was not foreseen and might be negative, we can actually get over that. And that's once again a new innovation of that. These innovations continuously help actually to improve our life. That's exactly what we do. And all these innovations have actually brought the human race wherever we are here today.
minuscule amount, less than 1% on science and technology and all that. And what is the foray into emerging areas, for instance, going for technology policy innovation to try and make those kind of network equipment.
You mentioned 5G, or there is an artificial intelligence, or water.
In which direction private sector R&D and their appetite for R&D?
What we forget is that the contribution of Israel public funding is much less than the private of GDP funding for R&D. Bulk of it is public funding. But quite rightly, the private investment actually R&D stations in India. The Amazons, the Googles, the General Electrics, and so on and so forth. They have very large all the time, tend to incentivize the private companies to spend more and more R&D. The CSR, of course, is taking.
But I actually understood your every word, and it is excellent. My query is that basically what I observed as a social scientist, there is a deviation from young people that they are not motivated towards fundamental sciences, and probably in the last 2000 joined the engineering colleges and that type of colleges which is not producing actually sciences, because fundamental sciences, without fundamental sciences, technology and innovation, I think there is a second layer, or in chemistry or higher education, fundamental sciences that is necessary to grow the economy.
I think both of us will answer this independently. So, in the last 40-50 years, in which most people, their prime aim when they were young is to get some stable job. I should do after 12. So the first question is, iska kya scope hai? But thankfully, things are changing quite rapidly. Quite rapidly in the current transition. If you see, many of the top IIT JEE rankers are IITs, and despite the resistance from their families, friends, and things like that. So there's a welcome change. Another, many of the engineering, there was a wave in which large number of engineering colleges started across the
that how much fun it is. So as they grow up, they will, themselves
sensitize scientists as well as the new researchers for the real need for innovation, or we are done with it, right? So it's really, and what we are doing, if at all there are some efforts.
There is no end to anything.
Yeah. So I think,
Yeah.
so you don't have to sensitize or desensitize anyone about it. Just leave people what they want to do.
Yeah.
Basic scientists, if they are curious.
So sir, just wanted to because we need to deal with this kind of problem which we are facing. So,
Yeah, I think of course the country-specific problems are very unique to all the countries,
yeah.
and that's exactly what we see is many different countries. I mean, how the innovation movement is put in out of the desert. What they have is a very green, and it's all through the innovation that they have had. I'm sure.
And the common man believes in it. So, do you think, like, as a scientist, inculcate scientific spirit among common masses? There's somewhere we lack as a society.
What is belief in evidence? And if somebody has produced an evidence by proper scientific methodology, and then the outcome of that, then is, we always say that the base of minority exists and the base of minority does not exist, or something like that. And that's how we are all trained to think in that particular direction. Many people in the society fail to accept that why scientists say this. I don't know how much of it is media creation and how much of it actually belief that society believes in, but scientists would always promote people to think that where there is evidence, believe that evidence. And where there is no evidence, let us accept that as something which does not have an evidence, and we need to generate evidence for that particular fact.
So only with education all over that we are going to, come to a point where there is a reasonable amount of scientific temper built in.
I should like to thank Dr. Mande. Thank you, sir, for accepting our offer. I really appreciate sparing this valuable time to be as one of the speakers of the STIP forum. I was looking forward to having this since I joined some 7 months ago, and now So, and we all know how busy he is, and we could match sometimes to get him here. Thank you, sir. And I think the very questions that popped out of the audience today speaks about how lucidly you presented these thoughts. Sometimes, you know, people avoid these kind of lectures thinking that's going to be a scientific talk, or they don't want to, after office hours, come and sit here to listen to so much of science. But I'm sure all of us are so highly benefited by these insightful thoughts and how to translate, how to innovate. Most of us will be doing that in our disciplines. Thank you, sir. And ma'am, also thank you very much. We opted to have you as the chairperson. Particularly very proud to have, you know, mention your achievements of being the INSA president-elect and the first one in the 84-year history of INSA. That really is a great achievement, and thank you very much, all of you, for coming. I'd like to definitely thank all the STIP member forum